I remember that night like it was stitched into my memory. It was just past midnight when I walked up the narrow pathway leading to my friend Ethan's house. The summer air was warm but restless, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine from the garden and the distant hum of crickets. My sneakers crunched softly against the gravel, each step strangely louder in the silence. I hesitated before knocking. It wasn't the first time I'd been here late. Ethan and I often pulled all-nighters, watching old movies and wasting hours on meaningless debates. But tonight felt different. The street was unusually still, the soft glow from the porch light pooling at my feet like a quiet secret waiting to be uncovered. I raised my hand and knocked, 3 light taps against the wooden door. When it creaked open, it wasn't Ethan standing there. It was Maya, his mom. She leaned slightly against the doorframe, her cardigan wrapped loosely around her shoulders, her expression unreadable. Her dark hair, usually tied neatly during the day, fell loosely now, framing her face in soft waves. There was something disarming about seeing her like this, relaxed, almost vulnerable. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, she tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into the faintest smile, and in a voice soft enough to feel like it was meant only for me, she whispered, "You're the only one who ever knocks this late. I like boys who knock at midnight." I froze. I didn't know if she was teasing me, half asleep, or saying something far heavier than it sounded. Her words hung in the warm night air, suspended between us like a secret I wasn't supposed to hear. I managed a quiet laugh, the kind you give when you're buying time to breathe. "Solvi, I didn't mean to wake anyone." She shook her head slowly, her eyes holding mine just a little longer than they should have. "You didn't wake me." Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten. It was simple, casual even, but there was a softness in her tone like she had been awake, waiting, or maybe restless like me. I stepped inside, and as I passed her, the faintest brush of her sleeve grazed my arm. It was nothing, a passing accident, but it sent a surprising rush through me, sharp and unsettling. Inside, the house was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a hallway lamp. Ethan's muffled laugh came from the living room, unaware of this quiet, suspended moment happening just steps away. I followed the sound, but part of me stayed behind, trapped in the echo of her whisper. "I like boys who knock at midnight." I didn't know why those words felt heavier than they should, but I knew, even then, this was the beginning of something I couldn't ignore. I couldn't sleep. The clock on the wall whispered past 1:30 a.m., its steady tick-tock crawling into the silence. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch, half buried under a blanket, his phone slipping from his hand. The TV murmured softly in the background, flickering shadows across the living room walls. I slipped out quietly, padding down the hallway in my socks. My throat was dry, and I figured a glass of water might help me settle. The house was dim, cloaked in that strange stillness that comes when everyone else is asleep. I followed the faint hum of the refrigerator and stepped into the kitchen and froze. Maya was already there. She stood barefoot by the counter, a half-filled glass of water in her hand, her posture relaxed, but her expression thoughtful. A faint pool of light from the fridge illuminated her face, softening the sharp edges of her features. Her hair was loose, tumbling over her shoulders, and the oversized cardigan she wore slipped slightly down one arm, revealing a glimpse of her bare skin. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked quietly, her voice hushed as though the walls might be listening. I shook my head, managing a small smile. "No, guess I'm too used to my own bed." Her lips curved into something between amusement and empathy. "The older you get, the harder it is to sleep in unfamiliar places," she said softly, taking a sip of her water. I almost laughed at that, but stopped myself, aware of the weight of her words. There was no hint of mockery in her tone, just an ease that made the air between us strangely comfortable and yet charged. I reached past her to grab a glass from the cabinet, and as I did, her sleeve brushed against my arm. It was the lightest touch, accidental and innocent, but it felt anything but. A shiver crawled beneath my skin, betraying me. She noticed. I knew she did, though neither of us said a word. The silence stretched, and suddenly, the faint sounds around us became louder. The hum of the refrigerator, the quiet drip of the faucet, the subtle creak of the wooden floor beneath our feet. "You've always been polite," she said after a moment, her tone soft, reflective. "Even as a kid, you never barged in, you always knocked." I glanced at her, the fridge light catching her profile, making her expression unreadable. "I guess I was raised that way," I murmured, trying to sound casual, though my chest felt heavier with every passing second. Her fingers tapped lightly against her glass, her gaze fixed on the countertop. And then she glanced at me, just briefly, but long enough for something unspoken to pass between us. It wasn't flirting, not yet, but it wasn't nothing either. I took a slow sip of water, forcing myself to look away, pretending to focus on the tiny condensation droplets sliding down the glass. Still, I could feel her eyes lingering, just long enough to leave me restless long after I returned to the couch. Morning came slower than I expected. When I woke up, the living room was bathed in a soft golden light, sunlight slipping through the sheer curtains and painting faint patterns across the carpet. Ethan was still asleep on the couch, tangled up in the blanket, his breathing deep and even. I stretched quietly, trying not to wake him, and slipped into the hallway. The faint aroma of fresh coffee pulled me toward the kitchen. I could hear the clink of plates, the low hum of the kettle, and soft music playing from someone's phone. When I stepped inside, Maya was there. She stood at the counter, tying her hair loosely into a messy bun, her cardigan draped casually over one shoulder. The sunlight caught strands of her dark hair, making them glow like burnished copper. She turned slightly at the sound of my footsteps, offering me a small, polite smile. "Morning," she said softly, her voice carrying that husky warmth that lingers after just waking up. "Morning," I replied, rubbing the sleep from my eyes as I slid into a chair at the table. For a while, there was only the quiet sound of her moving around, the soft scrape of utensils, the muted thud of cabinet doors, the steady drip of coffee filling the pot. It felt strangely intimate, being here like this, just the two of us awake in a house that still felt half asleep. She set a plate of toast on the table, sliding the butter toward me without a word. When I reached for it, her fingers brushed mine, just briefly, just enough to notice. A small, almost imperceptible pause followed, but she didn't acknowledge it, and neither did I. But my heart did. I focused on spreading butter over the toast, pretending it was nothing, though I was suddenly too aware of everything. The way sunlight spilled across the table, the faint scent of her citrus shampoo, the warmth of her presence only a few feet away. Ethan eventually shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep, mumbling something about coffee. He slid into the chair opposite me, yawning so wide it made Maya laugh softly. And yet, every time I glanced up, I caught her watching me. Not staring, not obvious, but watching like she was studying me in the quiet gaps between conversations. Whenever our eyes met, she'd look away quickly, as though she hadn't meant to be caught. At one point, Ethan asked her something about lunch plans, and while she answered him, her gaze drifted toward me again, just briefly, before returning to her son. It was subtle, almost nothing, but it wasn't nothing. By the time breakfast ended, I felt like I'd been holding my breath the entire time. Every small glance, every lingering pause, every brushed fingertip carried a weight neither of us was ready to name yet. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. By evening, the heat of the day had broken, giving way to a restless summer storm. The first raindrops came softly, pattering against the glass like whispered secrets. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, and the air smelled damp and electric, the kind of scent that always hinted at change. I wandered into the hallway, half expecting Ethan to be around, but I couldn't hear him anywhere. Instead, faint music drifted from somewhere outside. Following the sound, I found Maya on the back porch. She was leaning against the wooden railing, her cardigan pulled close, her gaze fixed on the darkened yard beyond. The rain was steady now, streaking down the glass panels and blurring the world outside into watercolor shapes. The soft glow from the porch light kissed her skin, outlining her silhouette in a warm halo. For a moment, I thought about turning back. Being alone with her felt dangerous somehow, but my feet didn't listen. "You couldn't sleep either?" I asked quietly, stepping closer. She turned slightly, offering me a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I wasn't trying to," she said softly. "Sometimes I like nights like this. Feels quieter somehow." I leaned against the railing a few feet away, careful to keep space between us, though every part of me felt hyper-aware of her presence. The rain filled the silence between us, soft but insistent. "You ever feel," she began slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass of tea, "like no one really sees you?" The question caught me off guard. Her voice wasn't playful this time. It carried a quiet weight, fragile but deliberate. I hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Yeah, more than I'd like to admit." She exhaled a faint laugh, but it wasn't out of amusement. "I've spent years taking care of everything and everyone. Ethan, work builds this house. And yet sometimes," her voice trailed off, almost swallowed by the rain. "Sometimes it feels like I'm invisible." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't try to fill the silence. Instead, I let her words hang there, giving them space to breathe. After a long pause, she glanced at me, her expression softer now, almost searching. "You're a good listener," she said finally, almost in a whisper. Something unspoken passed between us then. Not romantic, not yet, but intimate in a way that made my chest tighten. I looked away first, my eyes tracing the rain as it raced down the glass. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "silence says more than words ever could." She smiled faintly at that, turning back to the yard, her shoulders relaxing just a little. For the next few minutes, we stood there without speaking, listening to the rain and the soft roll of distant thunder. And though nothing was said, something had shifted, something neither of us could take back. That night, I woke up again. The living room was dark except for the faint blue glow from the muted television. Ethan was still sprawled across the couch, snoring softly under the weight of the blanket. The rain from earlier had slowed to a drizzle, tapping gently against the windows like a soft reminder that the world outside was still awake. I got up quietly, my throat dry, and padded barefoot down the hallway toward the kitchen. That's when I saw her. Maya stood there in the hallway, leaning against the wall as though she'd been waiting for something, or maybe for nothing at all. She wore a loose, pale sweater now, its sleeves tugged halfway over her hands, and her hair was down again, slightly tousled, like she'd just given up on trying to tame it. "Couldn't sleep either?" I whispered, my voice low out of instinct. She shook her head slowly, her lips curling into the faintest, tired smile. "Not tonight," she murmured, her voice soft but steady. Storms always keep me up. I nodded, stepping closer, but stopped a few feet away, unsure why I suddenly felt the need to measure the distance between us. The hallway light was dim, spilling over the wooden floor in a soft, golden glow. The house was silent except for the faint creak of the old floorboards beneath us and the distant drip of rain outside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. And yet, everything felt loud. My heartbeat, the rhythm of my breathing, the awareness of how close she was. I leaned against the opposite wall, mirroring her stance, trying to appear casual even though my chest felt tight. She glanced at me briefly, then looked down, playing absently with the edge of her sleeve. "Do you ever get the feeling," she said quietly, "that you're awake when the rest of the world is sleeping, like you're the only one carrying the weight of it all?" I swallowed hard, nodding faintly. "Yeah," I whispered, more often than I'd like to admit. Our eyes met then, just for a moment, but it was enough. The silence between us thickened, shifting from something comfortable to something charged, delicate, and dangerous. And then it happened. As I shifted my weight, my hand brushed lightly against her forearm. It was barely a touch, soft and fleeting, but it felt deliberate even though it wasn't. Her breath caught, just slightly, just enough to hear if you were close enough. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Time stretched. The quiet hum of tension filled the space where words should have been. Finally, she inhaled deeply, as though steadying herself, and stepped back half a pace. "You should try to get some sleep," she whispered, her voice low but gentle. I nodded, but my body didn't move until she did, until I heard the soft creak of her steps fading down the hallway. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space she'd left behind, my arms still tingling from the ghost of her touch. And I knew then, whatever this was, it wasn't nothing anymore. The next morning arrived too soon. Sunlight spilled through the curtains in soft, dappled patterns, warming the living room carpet. Ethan was already awake, pacing lazily between the kitchen and the couch, muttering something about being late to meet a friend. The house felt different, louder somehow, but beneath the chatter and clinking dishes, I could still feel the quiet weight of last night pressing at the edges of my thoughts. I packed my things slowly, folded my hoodie into my bag, trying to act normal. But my chest felt tight, restless like something was unfinished. Every accidental glance toward the hallway, every passing shadow, carried an unspoken question. I was almost out the door when Maya appeared. She stepped into the entryway quietly, barefoot, holding a mug of coffee in both hands. Her hair was still slightly damp from a shower, curling faintly around her shoulders, and the pale morning light softened her features, giving her an almost dreamlike calm. "You're heading out?" she asked, her voice low, unhurried. I nodded, adjusting the strap on my bag. "Yeah, figure I'd give you guys some space today." She smiled faintly, though there was something in her expression I couldn't read. "You don't have to rush off," she said softly. "But I get it." Ethan called from somewhere down the hall, asking about his keys, and for a moment we both froze, like two conspirators caught in a silence we couldn't explain. When his footsteps faded away, she shifted slightly closer, just enough for her voice to drop. "You were quiet last night," she whispered, almost teasing but laced with meaning. I hesitated, forcing a half smile. Didn't want to wake anyone. Her gaze lingered on mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and then, without moving her lips much, as if the walls themselves might overhear, she leaned just slightly closer and murmured near my ear, "I wasn't joking when I said I like boys who knock at midnight." The words landed softly, but they reverberated through me like distant thunder. I froze, unsure whether to breathe, move, or speak. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, loud enough I was sure she could hear it. And then she stepped back, taking a small sip from her mug, her expression calm again, as if she hadn't just set my entire world spinning with a single sentence. "Drive safe, okay?" she said lightly, almost casually, before turning toward the kitchen. I stood there for a moment, staring at the open doorway, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't a confession. Not exactly. But it wasn't nothing either. As I stepped outside, the sunlight felt warmer, heavier somehow. Her whisper echoed in my head, looping endlessly. I wasn't joking, and I knew, deep down, this wasn't over. 3 weeks passed. I told myself I'd moved on, that what happened at Ethan's place was just a fleeting moment, a passing current I'd imagined in the quiet of a stormy night. But some things refused to be ignored. Her words followed me everywhere. I wasn't joking when I said I like boys who knock at midnight. No matter how many times I replayed them, I couldn't decide if it had been a playful tease, a quiet confession, or something in between. That night, the roads were empty, and the air was thick with summer heat, the kind that made the world feel heavy and still. I wasn't planning to be anywhere near their neighborhood, and yet somehow, my car turned down that familiar street. I parked across from their house and killed the engine. The soft hum of cicadas filled the night, and the street lamps cast long, golden shadows across the pavement. I shouldn't have been there, and yet I was. Before I could second-guess myself, I got out and walked up the narrow stone pathway I knew by heart. The porch light was off this time, leaving the doorway cloaked in darkness. My heartbeat thundered louder with every step, a strange mix of anticipation and guilt churning in my chest. I stood there for a moment, hand hovering over the wooden door, wondering if I should just turn around. But then I knocked. 3 soft taps, the same as before. Seconds stretched into what felt like forever. The hum of cicadas seemed to fade into silence. Then, the porch light flickered on. The door opened slowly, and there she was. Maya. Her cardigan was draped loosely around her shoulders, and her hair fell in soft waves, slightly messy as though she'd just woken up. She blinked at me, surprise flickering in her expression for the briefest moment before something else settled there. Something quieter, softer. Neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Her gaze searched mine, and though no words passed between us, everything we'd left unsaid in the last 3 weeks hung in that space between the open door and the warm night air. Finally, she stepped aside, not fully, just enough for the doorway to open slightly wider. It was an unspoken invitation, delicate and restrained. I hesitated only a heartbeat before stepping forward. As I crossed the threshold, the soft scent of jasmine from the garden drifted through the open window, mingling with the faint warmth of her perfume. The door clicked gently shut behind me, sealing the quiet moment inside. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Sometimes everything is said in silence. And as we stood there, the soft hum of summer outside and the weight of unspoken promises between us, I realized something with startling clarity. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning.